Hello, I'm Benjamin Franklin. I was born on January 17, 1706 in Boston. At that time, it was known as the Massachusetts Bay Colony. My father was an English-born soap and candle maker. His name was Josiah Franklin. He had 7 children with his first wife and 10 more with his second wife, Abadiah. I was the 15th child and the youngest son. I learned to read at an early age, and despite my success at the Boston Latin School, I had to stop because my father ran out of money when I was 10 years old. And I had to go to work in his candle business. But wax and candle drippings didn't really suit me all that well. So I was apprenticed to my brother, my older brother, as a printer. At 12, his name was James, at his print shop. And James was kind of a really brutal taskmaster. And he mistreated and took advantage of my free labor. And he beat me. But I did learn a great deal about newspapers and printing. And I adopted a very similar brand of politics to what my older brother had at the time. Along this time, I started writing articles, but my brother wouldn't publish them. So I adopted a pen name, Silence Do-Good. I wrote these articles, I slipped them under the door to his print shop, and I couldn't believe it, but he loved them, and he published them. As a matter of fact, it contributed to the success of his newspaper, the New England Courant. Sadly, I got nothing for this. After some time, this made me quite angry. So I ran away from James and my apprenticeship. After moving back to Philadelphia and starting work for Mr. Reed and getting to know his daughter Deborah, I met Governor William Keith. And Governor Keith, after some years, encouraged me to set up my own print shop. So at this time in 1724, I took a trip to London to purchase supplies and make relationships with suppliers, booksellers and printers and so forth in London. But when I arrived in London, however, I felt a little bit misled because Governor Keith's letters of introduction never arrived as promised, and I was forced to find work as a printer to support myself. While there, I took full advantage of the city's offerings and got to know people, going to theater, met with the other members of the parliament, and got to meet people in the coffee houses and so forth and develop business relationships that contributed to my success throughout my whole life. I also took a daily swim in the River Thames at this time, and I learned to make a set of wooden swim fins that I was credited with that helped my long distance swimming. By 1725, I had moved back to Philadelphia, and I published my first pamphlet, a dissertation on liberty and necessity, pleasure and pain, in which I argued that humans lack free will and thus are not morally responsible for their actions. I realized the silliness of my writings as I got older, and I burned all but one copy of this pamphlet. When I had returned, I found that Deborah Reed had married in the interim while I was over in London, but her husband left her after only 6 months. In this next few years, I held various jobs as a bookkeeper, shopkeeper, currency cutter, so forth, but I returned to printing in 1728 when I had a contract to print the currency of New Jersey. At this time, I partnered with a friend and opened my own print shop in Philadelphia, and we published government pamphlets and books. In 1730, I was appointed the official printer of Pennsylvania. By this time, I had formed a junto, a social and self-improvement group with other young men in Philadelphia, and we debated morality, philosophy, politics, various things like this. When we wanted to expand the reading choices for these members, we decided to open the first library in Philadelphia. That was in 1731. In 1729, I published another pamphlet, A Modest Inquiry into the Nature and Necessity of Paper Currency. This pamphlet advocated for an increase in the money supply to stimulate the economy. With the money that I earned from this pamphlet, I was able to purchase the Pennsylvania Gazette, my first newspaper, from a former boss. Under his ownership, this newspaper was transformed into from a relatively small newspaper to a widely read paper in the colonies and became one of the first to turn a profit. In 1732, he had launched the first German language newspaper in the colonies, which didn't last long, and it was called the Philadelphia Zeitung. Around this time, I rekindled my relationship with Deborah Reed, and I took her as my common-law wife from 1730. At this time, my first son was born, William. But fortunately, my wife took him in as her son as well. Our first son together was Francis. He was born in 1732, but he died 4 years later from smallpox. My only daughter, Sarah, was born some years later in 1743. During this time, we became more and more successful and more influential in the local Philadelphia establishment in the business world. We started publication of Poor Richard's Almanac at the end of 1732. During this time period, as we published Poor Richard's Almanac and so forth, our success of the printing business grew exponentially. We published weather forecasts, astronomical information, moonrise, moonsets, various things in the almanac, when to plant, when not to plant, things of this nature, and became very, very popular. We published this for 25 years and included anecdotes and proverbs, penny saved, penny earned, early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Various things of this nature that became very popular, with the public. I bought real estate and other businesses, and we also organized the first volunteer fire company in Philadelphia. We also, I was fortunate also to become the first postmaster as well. By 1740, I've been experimenting with numerous other problems, and one of the issues that we had at the time was the conventional fireplace, as you see here, used a tremendous amount of wood and didn't provide that much heat for early households. I had been working on a design that I was offered a patent on from the governor, but I thought it more important to pass this along to the rest of the men and women of the United States, because it would contribute a lot of heat and burn much less fuel. So I refused the patent from the governor on this, and we just put this out to where it could be used and manufactured by any iron shop or blacksmith, and as a result, this ends up being a huge benefit for the frontier life in what was the United States at that time. By the time I was 42, I was one of the wealthiest people in Pennsylvania, and I sold my printing business over to a partner, which allowed me to conduct more time in my scientific experiments and so forth, and I've been very interested in electricity for quite some time, and I've been writing to others and so forth about it, so we were exchanging ideas back and forth, and we didn't have any terms for this at the time, so the terms switch, conductor, insulator, various things were just things that had been agreed upon between myself and my other contemporaries that were experimenting with this, and that's just how those terms came to be, because we just didn't have any other term to describe what we were trying to figure out here. At 42, I became a soldier in the Pennsylvania militia, but my interest in electricity was also ignited about this time, and my investigations into the electrical phenomena were compiled into a pamphlet that I wrote called Experiments and Observations on Electricity. This was published in England in 1751, and this is also where we conducted the first kite and key experiment in the rain and so forth to demonstrate that lightning was in fact electricity. That was accepted by the other members of the society at the time. I also invented the lightning rod and coined several different terms like we had previously talked about. The lightning rod contributed to the success of being able to protect people's houses and so forth at the time, because it greatly distressed me at the time that a lightning strike would hit a house and suddenly a farmer or a family would be burned out of their house and lose pretty much everything they had at the time. So by putting this lightning rod up on the top of the building, connecting it with a wire or conductor to the ground, that protected the house. This invention also produced revenue for us and so forth, and gave me a once again, more of a benefit to that I could reinvest into other enterprises and so forth. We also developed along this time the first set of bifocals, and I'm also came across and credited with creating the first rocking chair. But along this time I was experimenting with a lot of different devices, and the ladies at the time used to be able to entertain folks by playing the water glasses. And it came to my attention that if we could use this technique to produce a musical instrument. So I did. We took glasses, turned them on the side, put a central shaft through the center of them. My prouder achievements. My self-education continued, and I was actually awarded degrees from Harvard, Yale, and England's Oxford University, as well as Scotland's University of St. Andrews. I wrote a pamphlet in 1749 that related to the education of youth in Pennsylvania, and this resulted in the establishment of the Academy of Philadelphia, now called the University of Pennsylvania. In 1748, I became a member of Philadelphia's City Council and a Justice of the Peace the following year. In 1751, I was elected to Philadelphia as an alderman and represented to the Philadelphia Assembly, a position to which I was re-elected annually until 1764. 2 years later, I accepted a royal appointment as the Deputy Postmaster General of North America. When the French and Indian War began in 1754, I called on the colonies to band together for their common defense, which I dramatized in a drawing in the Pennsylvania Gazette, with a cartoon of a snake cut into sections with the caption, "Join or Die." I represented Pennsylvania at the Albany Congress, which adopted my proposal to create a unified government for the 13 colonies under what I called the Plan of Union. However, this failed to be ratified by the colonies. In 1757, I was appointed by the Pennsylvania Assembly to serve as the colony's agent in England. I sailed to London to negotiate a long-standing dispute with the proprietors of the colony, the Penn family, William Penn and his family. I left Deborah behind, and Sarah, and I spent most of the next 20 years in London, where I was drawn into society and intellectual conversations with this up-and-coming city. After I returned to Philadelphia in 1762, I toured the colonies to inspect the post offices. William took office as New Jersey's royal governor, and that was a position that his father had arranged through his political connections with the British government. Around this time, I lost my seat in the Pennsylvania Assembly in 1764, after which I returned to London as the colony's agent, but without Deborah, who refused to leave Philadelphia. Deborah passed away in 1774 from a stroke at the age of 66. But when I came back to London at this time, there was a tense relationship between England and the colonies. And Parliament's passage of the Stamp Act in March of 1765 imposed a highly unpopular tax on all printed materials for commercial and legal use in the colonies. Since I had purchased stamps for my printing business and nominated a friend of mine as the Pennsylvania stamp distributor, some colonists thought that I implicitly supported this new tax, and riots broke out in Philadelphia. My house was threatened, but I was passionate about denouncing the tax in my testimony before Parliament. However, this contributed to the Stamp Act's repeal in 1766. 2 years later, I wrote another pamphlet, Causes of the American Discontents Before 1768. And I soon became an agent for the Massachusetts, Georgia, and New Jersey colonies as well. 2 years later, I wrote another pamphlet, The Causes for the American Discontents Before 1768. And as a result of this, I was appointed as agent for Massachusetts, Georgia, and New Jersey as well. I continued writing, which contributed to the rising spirit of individualism in America. And I wrote to the governor of Massachusetts, Thomas Hutchinson, and this gentleman called for the restriction of the rights of the colonists and so forth, which inflamed me. I could not believe that this governor would make such a storm. This ended up causing a firestorm after his thoughts were published in the Boston newspapers. In the wake of this scandal, I was removed as Deputy Postmaster General, and as a result had to leave London at the time. I returned to North America in 1775 as a devoted patriot. On the trip back, on the sailing back from England at this time, it came to my attention that the trips going to England from the United States took less time than the trips back. I took a combination of temperature readings in the ocean and measured our time, and this is how I came to the understanding that there is an ocean current called the Gulf Stream. I'm also credited, because of this observation, with discovering the Gulf Stream. By 1775, I was elected to the Second Continental Congress and appointed the first Postmaster General for the colonies. And in 1776, I was appointed as Commissioner to Canada and was one of 5 men to draft the Declaration of Independence. My support for the Patriot cause put me at odds with my loyalist son, also known as a Tory. When the New Jersey militia stripped William of his post as royal governor and imprisoned him, I chose not to intercede on his behalf. After voting for independence, I was elected commissioner to France and sent sail to negotiate a treaty for the country's military and financial support. At this time, I was appointed as U.S. ambassador to France. I was sent to negotiate on behalf of the colonies for military and financial support. I was very much accepted in Paris, and my thoughts and wit were much appreciated. I was able to meet King Louis XIV, and I worked on the Treaty of Paris, which ended up the Revolutionary War in 1783. After almost a decade in France, I returned to the United States in 1785, where I was elected in 1787 to represent the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at the Constitutional Convention. This drafted and ratified the new U.S. Constitution. I was the oldest delegate at 81. I also supported the concept of the turkey being the national bird at this point, but my thoughts were summarily dismissed. In 1787, I became a member of the Society for Political Inquiries, and in 1790, I became president of the Abolition Society, which advocated for the elimination of slavery in the U.S. colonies. I sent a petition to Congress in 1790 to this end, but that was summarily rejected. This is just a brief overview of my life and so forth, my experiences during my lifetime and the contribution I was able to make to what became the United States. I pray that my contributions to the country will contribute to the life, liberty, and happiness of my fellow Americans, and I pray that you continue to live in harmony with each other at this time.